The question is at Part 3, that's clauses 61 to 121 in Schedules 1A to 2, stand part.
Mr Chair.
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Chair. We come to really the meat and drink of the bill, and I get the feeling that Part 1 and 2 were the curtain raiser to what is the main event and the reason that opposition parties are so opposed to the bill. I certainly have appreciated the robust but respectful interventions so far, and I trust that they will continue through Part 3, although I don't I have reasonable expectations about the degree to which we're able to create an epiphany and unity around the chamber by the end of the night, but we'll give it a go. I want to start by referencing... that's right. I want to reference the Workplace Health and Safety Task Force report because it's been quoted quite a bit, particularly in the context of worker representation. And I have said publicly that I have been disappointed at the misrepresentation of the government's position in this regard, and I stand by that, and I want to explain why. Now, it's very clear to me that there is a disassociation between health and safety participation and health and safety representation, and they are two quite discrete things, but very often in the public narrative they have been conflated. I just want to quote the task force report at paragraph 234, 5 and 6. Quote, "We consider that there needs to be a major mind shift in New Zealand society and in workplaces. This mind shift needs not only to lead to more opportunities for worker participation, but also to set an expectation that everyone in the workplace is responsible for workplace health and safety." They went on to say that at a workplace level, the task force considers it is important that each workplace is able to identify the approach to worker participation that is appropriate in the circumstances. Case study research commissioned by the task force reinforced that worker participation arrangements are varied in how they work in practice and somewhat different to that envisaged by the legislation. While a one-size-fits-all approach to effective worker participation is not appropriate, PCBUs do need to ensure that they have effective systems for worker participation. Now, they did go on at another part of the report to say that health and safety representation also needed to be beefed up. And I accept that, and I believe this bill does that. So what we have is the task force saying three things. Worker representation needs to be beefed up. Worker participation needs to be across the board. And, crucially, there is not a one-size-fits-all approach to this. And I think that point is the crucial point when it comes to arguing about the merits or otherwise of the mandatory requirement to have health and safety representation superimposed on what we agree is the mandatory requirement to have worker participation. And this is fundamental to the approach, what I believe was a sensible and balanced approach to where the government has landed in this bill. Now, we'll argue the merits of that through Part 3. But I do want to, and I'll attempt to do this as gently as possible, because I have tried very hard in the data that I have explored to find a correlation between the presence of a health and safety rep in the workplace and the incidence of serious injury and death in the workplace. And I can't. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that health and safety representatives aren't important. In fact, quite the opposite. But what that says to me is that there are many other factors at play in determining whether practicable steps are being taken in a workplace to keep people safe and whether all workers are participating in that health and safety process. Now, I've reflected a lot on this and in a previous life as a chartered accountant giving business advice to small businesses. One of the things that I observed in those businesses was that often somebody gets to be the go-to guy and that they become the health and safety rep, and it's that guy's responsibility. And indeed, it's a bit of a cop-out. And this is redressed by the Health and Safety Task Force report. It's really important to me that not be the case, because worker participation is the most important change that we need to make in bringing about the culture change that's necessary in our workplaces. Mr. Chairman?
The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
And I firmly believe that for many organisations, if they don't have the right culture settings, just having a health and safety rep is the easy path. You know what the harder path is going to be, I suspect. I think the harder path is going to be when a small business in a low risk, that's not in the classification of high risk, says, you know what, the health and safety rep is not the right model for us. We're going to have another way of engaging all of our workers in health and safety. Whether it's going to be weekly toolbox meetings, whether it's going to be a connected online health and safety app, because remember, a lot of these sort of plumbing firms or construction firms or whatever, they're out and about. They're not in an office. They're all over the town sometimes. And getting together and understanding where the hazards are, what the risks are, and how to manage them is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Now, all of that said, the purpose of this is not to diminish the important role of health and safety reps. They're very important, but they're not the only way to deliver effective health and safety participation and that culture. So this framework has been very clear that the majority of workers in New Zealand, more than 3/4, will be in organisations that when the staff ask for a health and safety rep, they'll get one. I have every confidence that of the other quartile, the answer to the request for a health and safety rep, as it is now, will be yes. But it's not a one-size cookie-cutter approach to worker participation. Now, I've set out in the upper quartile of risk the principles that we'll use to identify and consult on the regulation that will determine high-risk industries. The risk of a catastrophic event. We know that Pike is driving a lot of our thinking. An industry with a fatality rate of more than 25 per 100,000 workers, and an industry with a serious injury rate of more than 25 per 1,000 workers. And with just one exception, everybody above that line is in. We've added in construction on the basis that there is an occupational disease risk with asbestos and silica, and I think that's appropriate, albeit that I have to acknowledge that the construction industry is on a very, very positive path to improving their serious injury rate. It's nearly halved in the last 5 years, and we've got to acknowledge that. Most of farming is out. Now, that has caused quite a surprise and lots of conspiracy theories about internal ructions and so on. But the simple fact is, yes, we need to improve our health and safety performance on farms. And yes, there is a high number of people with serious injury and death, but they are also our largest industry. So when you standardise those rates by the size of that industry and the size of the workforce, they fall down the rankings and out of that top quartile. Now, I do happen to believe that farming is one of those industries that does require a different approach because of the nature of the workplace, and that the health and safety rep system might have been the easy path out anyway, and you'll probably, one would see, I think, some farming entities taking that up. But actually what I want from farming is a much more nuanced approach to health and safety, because they've got to lift their game. We're going to resurrect the Quad Bike Safety Committee because that is kind of the ground zero for farming injuries and deaths. And if we can fix that, and if we can ease farming concerns about the regulator, which actually we're on a really good path to, I think we're on a much better trajectory for improving health and safety in that industry. But I stand by these changes. I strongly endorse them as being the right approach, the balanced approach to effective health and safety representation, and most importantly, the culture change through worker participation that this country needs. Because we said it at the start, we've said it at each reading, laws and regulations aren't going to make the change we need, behaviours and attitudes are. And that involves every worker, every PCBU and every officer.